That way you don't get my, this session is now being recorded. All right. All right, this isn't going to work on this thing. All right, this isn't going to work. So I'm going to have to keep walking over and turning it because that thing, it doesn't like it because there's too many things on. All right, so we're up to chapter 4, which is the founding of unity. So like we said yesterday, or like I said yesterday, Myrtle didn't set out to start a movement. She didn't set out to start a church. She didn't even set out to start an organization. She set out to heal herself. I'm dying. I don't like it. Do something. I want to do something about it. And the best thing was that she was constantly open to that there might possibly be something different, you know, because otherwise she wouldn't have been able to hear E.B. Weeks. Like Charles, the skeptic, he didn't hear anything. He heard a bunch of words strung together, and it all kind of made sense. But as a skeptic, a scientist, a relativist, locked into the relative world, it wasn't connecting to him at all. So, but like many people, when she had a profound experience, it was both visible to the external world, her neighbors, and when we have a profound experience, this annoys me. You all have the PowerPoint, so I want to keep them. How do I keep them up?
Click on the people.
Keep on the people. So there you go.
There.
I hate not being able to see them.
I know it.
So, like all people, like almost everybody, when you have a profound experience that seems to be life-changing, you want to share it. Depending on who you are, your personality will depend on how you share that. If you're an introvert, you may just share the very intimate with your family, something like that. Obviously, she was willing to go beyond that. In her case, it was that there was a power that could heal, you know. And their original, especially in the original Society for Silent Friends, almost everything was around healing. It wasn't until later that it began to start expanding into peace and prosperity and the other things, because they started realizing that this principle works here, then this principle works here. Like I say when I teach a prosperity class, the only reason I teach a prosperity class is exactly the same principle as if you're going through a health challenge. It's exactly the same thing as if you're going through a relationship challenge. It's exactly the same thing if your life's in chaos. The difference is, first off, we all have to deal with money. And second off, it's a little bit more dispassionate to talk about prosperity in terms of material wealth than when I'm in the midst of a health crisis. I'm too much in my fear to be able to hear you. Well, now, if I just work these principles, then I'm going to heal. Sometimes it's a little bit more difficult. So if you can work it in one area, you can work it in all areas. So her original prayer was, you are a beloved child of God, and God's will for you is health and wholeness. And in the founding of Unity, Charles was the skeptic. As the head of Unity, it was, prove it to me. So as he actually wrote, although I was a chronic invalid in chronic pain for decades, the doctrine didn't appeal to him at all. You know, so the question would be is, when was the last time you had something which seemed to be a perfect fit for you, and yet because it's so far out of the realm of your understanding, it doesn't appeal to you?
Say that once more.
So I like to take, if this is a history class, but if it's just about Charles and Myrtle, take the book, go home and read it. Now you have the history. You don't need a class for that. I like to take it and, because this is unity, personalize it. So Charles is only an example of how we participate in the world when we have something presented to us that, even though it seemingly answers the questions that we've had or the situation, because it's outside the realm of our understanding, it doesn't appeal to us and we're skeptical. No, that can't possibly be true. It can't possibly be that easy. I don't know about you. I've been struggling with it for 20 years in finances. Healing, I got it, you know. I have no problem with the healing. But I have a hard time translating it over into the finances. That it's not up to me, that I don't have to work so hard. I don't have to figure it out, you know. And yet, like Charles, I keep striving and trying, and I keep teaching the class because eventually I'll learn something. So
I think it's hard when those of us who have come from blue collar workers, and that was ingrained in us. You have to work hard to get it.
Save your money.
I need to change this slide. This is
My biggest struggle in prosperity is not about your bank account. You're incredibly prosperous and has nothing to do with your bank account.
Rev Ray, there's another button that will allow you to share your screen.
Yeah.
I don't know about Aaron and Donna, but I don't see the slides.
I got it up.
Okay, there's another button. It looks like a monitor.
It got turned off accidentally somewhere in there. There it goes. Sorry.
That's okay. Thank you.
It just got turned off. I just can't, for some reason, I'm not able to change.
Got it now. Thank you.
Okay. There you go. I'm just gonna leave. I'm gonna have to leave them off because
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a little annoying.
Val does too.
Yeah. Okay. So so that was a question. Is there a time when, if not, we'll move on.
When we feel like
The question.
Yeah. Where you feel like it can't possibly be that can't possibly be true, even in the face of the evidence. Because he said, but he saw the results, which he couldn't deny. So he started working it anyhow.
Well, I can't believe Donald Trump is still in the race for presidency. If that.
Okay. All right.
Well, when I came into Unity, facts are not truth.
That's right.
When I came into Unity, you know, I started reading Joel Goldsmith and people like that.
Right.
I'm thinking, this could possibly be true. You
Right.
know, coming from the Catholic perspective,
Right.
and, you know, that it's possible.
Yeah.
This is a possibility. Yeah.
Well, I would use Donald Trump for the example of how do I continue to hold somebody in complete light when I'm seeing him as anything but light and love. So you get to shift your attention and just continue to hold him in light instead of in judgment. And it can be that easy because the teaching is you don't have to like Donald Trump, but you have to love him. You have to see the blessing in him.
Well, he's bringing all this nasty, oozy stuff like he popped a big zit
Right.
in the consciousness of America. So, hey, there we
So
go.
there you go. Yeah.
He popped
All
a big
that.
zit on the consciousness of.
And all
Good thing
this
you're not an
nasty
internet
shit.
troll. 'Cause if you were an internet troll, that would probably be out in the cyberspace already.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Charles embarked on a systematic study where he would pray every night at the same time. He would do the same thing. He was cold and he was dispassionate about it. But you have to admit, if at nothing else, he was persistent. This was a man who would set an intention and stay with it.
Wow.
I wish I had his persistence without the squirrels, because he would do it every night. And he also would continue his studies to try and figure it out. So he was trying to figure out in the very beginning, after Myrtle's healing, He was trying to figure it out from the intellect. He was trying to figure it out from his knowledge and wisdom, which also tended to confuse them because there was a lot of stuff that was all contradictory. When you get new ideas coming, everybody throws their ideas out and you wait for a while to see what did Cindy say about us being a yes-giving ministry where we let people just say yes and let them try stuff, because we'll throw the spaghetti against the wall and see what sticks. You know, not every idea was worthwhile, but every idea was out there. And like today, everybody was self-publishing. Everybody was putting everything out there. It was, and there was all this newness coming. So, and a lot of it conflicted, and he called it the Babel. The Babel that's out in what we now would call the cyberspace. The amount of just absolute din of conflicting information, which made it all very difficult. And on page 53, he wrote a letter. Belief cometh by hearing, and hearing by the word of Christ. Set a time every day, a definite time, and pray whether you believe or not. Take a truth statement and repeat it over and over. It doesn't matter at first whether you believe it to be true. If you will persistently affirm the truth, even though you don't believe it at first, you will find that your prayers have power. Faith is like a mustard seed that will grow. Pray, 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 pray. Affirm and yet affirm once more, your persistent prayers will succeed. So what he was saying is, even in his skepticism, because he was persistent, what I typically say is that your brain's not that smart. Even though it's the seat of all thinking and your imagination, the intellect will end up believing something if you say it long enough. In recovery, we call fake it till you make it. You keep doing it. You keep going to the meetings. You keep following the principles. You keep doing the things, and eventually one day you wake up. You've had a spiritual awakening, and you seem to be serene and sober and sane for the first time in decades. Oftentimes. So his words were, just keep doing it until things change. And he said from the babble that he was hearing constantly, that in the end, let the babble go. Nothing wrong with study, but let the babble go and always return to source. And the source is, Robin, what's the source?
What's the source?
Yes.
God.
God. So always return to source. Don't let the confusion and the babble distract you from your intention. Don't let the confusion and the babble and all the different messages that you receive, one person will say, well, you're never going to be healed if you can't go back and heal that inner child that was hurt when you were 3 years old. Another person says, ignore the inner child. You don't need anything. You only need this. One person will say you have to recognize the shame conversation. Another person will say, ignore the shame conversation and just change your mind to something else, and the behavior will follow and the shame will follow. Ignore that, go to source. God will have the answer. So I like to say it's like the idea of, don't let the menu confuse you to think that you're having a meal by reading the menu. The menu is only pointing you in the direction of what you may want to eat, but you're not actually eating by looking at the menu. You're not actually in New York traveling in a carriage in Central Park by reading a travel brochure. So all the study just points you in the direction. The source takes you there. We'll give you the answer when you listen. Any questions on that? Thank you. And as oftentimes when these things happen, the external world will provide you exactly what you need so that you have the time to devote to that thing that you want most. So his real estate bubble burst in 1889.
Yeah.
And it didn't just burst in Kansas City. We had one of the largest depressions in the United States that's kind of not known very well because we had the depression in the 30s, but the depression in the 80s was just as bad as the one in the 30s, but we didn't have the good communication, so nobody actually kind of knew how devastating that depression was. And people lost millions and millions of dollars, and some people made millions and millions. So he had a lot of time on his hands because it was the worst real estate business he had ever had. So he started with the idea that there was a divine principle and a science of being, but he wasn't certain what it was. So for those of us looking backwards from 2016, it looks like Charles had this well-developed thought about everything because we have all these different books of his, except for most of those books are later manifestations, many of them after he's dead, just called from his writings that were put together by Cora. He actually was still struggling with what this meant. He knew it was there, he just didn't know what it was. So he was originally open to a lot of different schools of thought: Christian Science, Theosophy, spiritualists, psychics, mesmerists, the occult. So what's the Theosophists? Anybody look it up?
It's a
I
new
used to
thought.
get-
What?
It's a new thought idea that came out of Russia, Madame Blavatsky.
Yes.
I used to get their magazine.
Mhm.
You know, they have a beautiful magazine. They used to, colorful, very,
And they're still around, you know.
yeah.
Just a different version of it. And then Christian Science was, now we know Christian Science is Mary Baker Eddy's organization. Back then, Christian Science was Coke. Anything that fell under the realm of Christian Science, they just called it Christian Science. When you go to a restaurant, you say, can I have a Coke? If they give a Pepsi, they'll give you a Pepsi. If they have an RC Cola, they give you a Cola. If it's generic, they give you a Cola. But everybody knows it is Coke. It's just Cola. It was, even though it was a brand, it was also generic. It was the two things at once. So there was a whole bunch of people printing stuff under the guise of Christian Science for many years until Mary Baker Eddy said, but I own Christian Science. So if you're going to write about Christian Science, you have to follow my teaching. And everybody said, thank you, no.
You need to change the slide.
Sorry. That's right. You know what? Let me go back. Sit over here. It's too hard for me to remember. So he was open to everything, including some of the Eastern religions that were starting to come out at the time, that we were starting to get knowledge of, the Buddhists, the Brahmins, and such. Later on in his magazine, pretty quickly, he started limiting his selection to only topics that related to the mind sciences, which he called Christian Science at the time. He dropped the occult. He dropped the psychics. He dropped the, didn't believe in channeling. He dropped the channelers. He has a famous quote that says, just because you're dead doesn't necessarily mean anything you have to say is important. You know, so he dropped anything except those things that related to what we now call New Thought, then they called the mind sciences. And he said it is not to condemn them, but to focus and concentrate our energies and work only in one area. He could have chosen a different way. He could have chosen theosophy. He just felt that they would be more effective if he was able to focus his attention in only one area, so that he would focus his attention on only one area of study, which I think is very enlightening for us. As someone with a curious mind, I'll go a lot of different places and read stuff, but I tend to focus myself exclusively in unity and new thought. I have great regard for interfaith people and stuff, but that's not my path. I stay focused so that I can continue to hone my own understanding. So without making anybody else wrong, that's the important thing. He said there might be value in everything, but he didn't necessarily have to promote it.
And the way he did it gives me hope, because you start out one way and you make a decision, and then you refine it as you go. And that's what, they struggle with the name, they struggle with what to include, but they got their focus down eventually. And we can change our path at any time.
Yep. And that's the thing. You can change, or you can refine however you choose to do. What are you going to say?
He focused mostly on scripture, right?
Right.
And later, after he went through all these different stages and came back to scripture and the metaphysical meaning in there, which is really first time someone had done that.
Yeah, the three people that he quotes most in his writing, other than he'll quote scripture, Shakespeare, and Emerson. Very influenced by the transcendentalist writers of the time. Very influenced by Shakespeare because of his teacher outside St. Cloud, who had all the classics, and very influenced by scripture, but wanting to look at it new, wanting to use the stuff that was coming out, because it was in the 1800s when they first started coming out with looking at scripture through the scientific lens of anthropology, historical criticism, of actually seeing. There's a quote that says, there is nothing in scripture as we understand it today that is meant as it was written 2,000 years ago. All the understanding, so that literalism doesn't work, because we're understanding it from in his case, a 19th century lens, when it was written in the hundreds. It was written in the 90s, it was written in the 80s. We can't possibly understand it, so hence the literal doesn't make any sense anyhow. So here's when all this was starting to come out then. They were the beginning. So he used scripture a lot.
Which is how we should view what our founding fathers came up with.
So I found it interesting that one of the things he had to do was, because like today, when you are far out of the mainstream, you are not it actually can spill over into your personal life, into your business life. When you're standing quite a bit outside your mainstream, he had to write under a pen name.
Yeah.
I love the pen name. Like anybody nowadays wouldn't know it's a pen name. My name is Leo Virgo. So, and that Myrtle just wrote under MF or M, so that it wouldn't spill over into his real estate business, because he was a little too far out there. So, and then, he went through a lot of gestation for this magazine, originally called Modern Thought, then it was called Christian Science Thought. Then Mary Baker Eddy said, no, you have to, if you're going to do Christian Science Thought, then you have to follow my teachings. Well, they never were students of Mary Baker Eddy anyhow, so they certainly weren't going to follow her teachings, and so then they changed it, and in a group meditation, it came to him. He heard it. He said he heard it clear as day, and he's the only one who heard it. So, you know, it was like unity, which was fine because they were very inclusive. They kind of cherry pick out of the best of all religions to kind of make into one. My guess is if unity was coming out today, they would accuse unity in the same way that they accuse, it's the one that Tom Cruise is in,
Scientology.
Oh,
Scientology.
Yeah.
You know, because Scientology does that. They pick the best of sociology and psychology and, you know, religion to make up one. You know, now they have other things going on that makes them a little weird. But so, but he actually cherry picked out things from other faiths, other traditions, other religions to make his own because he said, I can. So I think that was great. And they began as a two-person operation to see. Has anybody been to the village? Yeah, yeah. So to see, did we lose Jenny again?
We may have.
She might be having tech problems. There you are.
We are.
We keep losing you. You don't have your microphone on.
No, we mute it so it doesn't back to you. Otherwise, we get a lot of feedback.
We stay muted
okay.
so we don't
Gotcha.
But sometimes I just get tired of seeing my face, so I'll turn off my webcam.
Oh, okay.
We don't get tired of it.
Yeah, but we don't get tired of it. Oh, so, began as a two-person job, and then their kids were working. Did anybody read the book about the stuff that they had to do? They had to, because they were selling books as well as their magazine. They had to wrap them. They had to cut them. And had anybody ever worked with old linotypes?
No.
You have this. You
very
have this
limited basis. It's very tedious.
It's a very tedious job. You have this little block, and you put in letters at a time, and and you block it out. And he would have to take it later on when they were publishing it elsewhere. You're having somebody else print it. He'd have to carry it to the wagon, and then drive the wagon. And if any piece fell out, any one letter fell out, the whole thing would collapse and they have to go back and start over.
Oh.
Having done linotype and having just one letter in the middle fall out, it's like dominoes. The whole thing just kind of collapses on itself and you have to start over. Very tedious process. Set by hand. And then they would wrap, they would ship, they would bind it together. They only kept a few copies. They were the Amazon, kind of like Amazon. Amazon doesn't keep many. The way they make the way they can do stuff, they don't keep it. They put it in their computer, and when you order one, it automatically kicks out and prints so that they can ship it. You know, they don't keep an inventory of 10,000 books of every title that's ever been made. They just keep they keep it in files. That's how they can do it.
I love that they didn't even have standard stock for it to print on it. So
Right.
you'd go down there at the warehouse and whatever was on sale, that's what's going to be printed.
And to save themselves money, because they weren't making a lot of money at this. I mean, it was interesting. So, and it was always considered, the Unity magazine, which is what it finally became, was just one of the things that the Society of Silent Friends did. It was just one of their programs rather than its own thing. It was always part of that organization. And the interesting thing about that is when about 15 years ago, they were going to stop publishing Unity magazine. And if you ever, how do you do this again? What do I do?
You have to undo people so that you can change the slide.
How do I undo people?
It's people thing.
Except for me.
No,
Oh,
okay.
well, I don't know. I shouldn't
Just
say.
do this. Okay.
Maybe, I don't know.
I don't either. No. I just get confused. Okay, there it goes. There you go. Yeah. So, caused almost as big an uproar in the Unity movement as making the proposal to do away with licensed Unity teachers. which was more insular to the leadership. And, licensed teachers feeling disrespected. Doing away with the magazine, they immediately said, okay, we won't, and kept publishing it. And I actually think it's a better magazine now than it's been in a long time. I think they have better articles. I think it's a much nicer magazine. We'll see how long they keep publishing it under new leadership. And then the interesting was he also developed the logo, which was wings on a globe, which he said was partly taken from Hinduism. And the wings, because he wanted to display on the globe, and that was their logo for decades. But we've changed the logo twice. We changed it to, the first one was, this is the first one, the wings on the globe. Everybody seen that one?
Mm-hmm.
Then they changed it to one on the bottom, the unity, the wings with unity. And now the top one actually is the, where's my, there you go, is actually this, which is supposed to signify a globe and the multicolors and such. And
the black one looks Egyptian, doesn't it?
Right. Oh yeah, Egyptian, not Hindu, Egyptian.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, that was right.
Yeah.
You're right. Bad thinking.
No, it's okay. Could have been the same.
Yeah. This one and this one were both came from this one especially came from Egypt, and he designed that himself. This was a response to, in early 2000, religious science decided to rebrand themselves because in the 2000s, no one actually quite understood what religious science meant. It was made a lot of sense back in the 1890s when religious science was founded, because that whole idea of Christian science, religious science, merging the two. Now there seems to be that idea that religion and science are somehow in conflict with each other. So the name religious science meant nothing and was actually confusing people. So they went through a whole rebranding until they became Centers for Spiritual Living. Unity, seeing how the branding worked, about 2008, 2009, somewhere in there, they hired the same company and rebranded Unity to the new logo with the new letters. The new letters. You can't see me when I point at the screen. There you go. The new lettering. And then all the churches, when we want to be branding, it just says, has this with the name of the city underneath. So like Unity Middletown, when they branded, changed themselves to East Louisville.
Yeah.
Because if you're not from Louisville, where's Middletown?
In the middle.
I would have been, if I was coming.
It was controversial. They thought about not even doing it.
If I came from Minneapolis, which I did, and I was looking for the churches in Kentucky, I would think Middletown was somewhere in the middle of the state because it's Middletown. I would have had no idea it's from Louisville, so I would have never even thought of going to it. So they're trying to do more of suggesting, you can call yourself anything you want. You could call yourself Middletown, but they're suggesting that you become more descriptive of where you actually are. Their description is, so now if I was moving into town, which people do all the time, and I was looking for a Unity church, I had a couple come in about 6 months ago. Moved in from out of state, came downtown, but live out in Bardstown, so they realized that East Louisville is so much closer. Because they now knew to look, go, oh, East Louisville. They said if it would have been Middletown, they wouldn't have never even looked for it. And by the time they get in, very much settled into the church, you end up driving the distance. You don't tend to switch spots. So it was a branding thing. I'm not sure how much people particularly like the new logo, the new ball. I'm not sure how well that's received. So what do you think?
I like it.
Do you? Okay.
I remember the resistance because I was going to Middletown.
Right.
Right.
And they're like, that's just going to benefit downtown Louisville if we do that. bull crap. It's
Yeah.
not either, you know, it's fine.
I like the idea that no matter where you go,
You can
you
find
know
that.
that's a Unity
Yes,
church.
and that's the idea of the
Yeah.
branding,
Yeah.
is that
Yes.
instead of having 700 churches spread out through the country,
Right.
each one, you know, we had every type of name that there was. Half the time you'd look up a church and you didn't know it was a Unity church because there was nothing that said Unity in it anywhere.
Right.
We are the Center for Prayer and Spiritual Understanding in Southern Utah. Okay, I'm not exactly sure if that's a Mormon church or if that's a, you know, so the idea, it's a good idea.
It's wonderful.
Right. So that's the whole idea, but we did switch from the classic, and there was a lot of resistance to that. And there still is some resistance nationally to letting go of some of the old symbols. So as you learn from Joseph Campbell, symbols are important to people.
Well, and I like the fact that it says a positive path for spiritual living, because it says it says in one short sentence really kind of what we're about.
Right.
Because I remember, you know, being in college at a Missouri Synod Lutheran church and in religion classes and saying I was part of the Unity movement, and no one had a clue what I was talking about. And this helps to kind of define our niche.
Yeah. So cool. So
like a pineapple.
what's that?
The new symbol reminds me of a pineapple.
It does.
In a way.
It does.
Which is great if you like pineapple.
Yeah.
And they don't tend to use the symbol without unity. They tend to collapse the two together, so it's one brand rather than just the two separate. So
If you want to make Unity not a well-kept secret, those are the kind of moves we need to make.
right. Agreed. So he began with as much of a quarter of his magazine was advertisement. They weren't commercial ads. I thought it was very telling that he said there's enough emphasis on making money. There's too much greed. So he is actually kind of a social justice guy. It wasn't where his intention lied, but it was like, I don't want to do that. I want to do that. But he did open it up to healers, metaphysical teachers, publications. And then he kind of changed it for a while, but then he had so many friends who still wanted to advertise that he actually created it as a tract society. Does anybody know what a tract society is? It's basically just a publication. So usually advertised free. So, and then he did do the Watchtower is actually a tract society of the Jehovah's Witnesses. You know, so if you read it, you'll have a hard time knowing that it's Jehovah's Witnesses, except if you look on the back, there's a thing that says printed by the Jehovah's Witnesses Watchtower Tract Society. So, and that's why he removed any appearance that it was a commercial venture. This was for the dissemination of information and teaching. And he later incorporated the Tract Society, which is no more, into the Society of Silent Unity. So Silent Unity being the head, and then Unity Magazine being under that. And actually later, it was Unity School of Christianity, with Silent Unity being one of the subgroups, which is the way it still is, though it's now called Unity World Headquarters, because no one quite understood what Unity School of Christianity is. We kept thinking it was a school when it wasn't. Yeah, it was so. And it used to be, and it will be no more. There is no school as of September at Unity World Headquarters.
What is it?
The school will be taken over by Unity Worldwide Ministries, who may not be leasing space at Unity World Headquarters, but the school will no longer be under that heading. Unity World headquarters. It used to be Silent Unity Publications, Retreats, Chapel, The Village, and Unity School, Unity Institute. Now it'll be Unity World headquarters. They don't own Retreats. They sublease that out. They don't own the chapel. They sublease that out. It is the Village, Unity Village, and the operation of the Village, Unity, Silent Unity, and publishing. So, and then administrative stuff.
So does that work with the teachers and the
We'll find out.
programs?
We're going to find out. Probably at June conference, we'll get the final decision. They've been working on that for. Did everybody know that?
Yes, I knew it.
Who said that? Yeah. Yeah.
Karen said it.
They've been working on that for about not quite. They actually got their organized around it starting October. They just hired a new head of the school, which is Devin Fraunfelder. She was just assigned as the head of the school, Unity School, which makes ordination, SEE, licensed Unity teacher, all fall under Unity Worldwide Ministries now, starting September. So.
Will people like Brummett and Hasselbeck, and will they still be?
They get to apply for jobs.
Wow.
What about the new tower and the different levels? Where's that under?
That is subleased to the Retreats is subleased out to a different organization, though it's really under it. It's just they don't manage it anymore. They manage it by a company, and that the tower is managed by an outside company, where Unity gets revenue, but the tower's sets their own prices, does their own thing, has their own boards, stuff like that.
Reverend Ray, I have a question. Do you think that June meeting that you all will find out how this affects the SEE and licensed Unity teachers?
Yes, we should. And the last thing I read was that they weren't going to do anything with the licensed Unity teacher program, that they had been tweaking that for so many years that was pretty much already negotiated between the school and Unity Worldwide Ministries. So the licensed Unity teacher program will probably stay similar. I don't know if it'll stay the same, but pretty close to similar. But we should get that information. If not before, we'll get it at June conference. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Didn't they say that the biggest change would be that they'd no longer have like ministerial classes on campus, that it was all going to be online and you wouldn't have to move there for 3 years to go to school like you did?
Yes. They said that's probably going to be one of the effects, is it will go to be an online program. So, yes.
I'm just going to say, it seems like that would cut down on a lot of enthusiasm, our being at the
Synergy.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. When you go out there, you get excited and,
Like all things, I was just having this conversation with one of my board things. Life changes, and those things that we get be really attached to, we resist the changes, whether or not they're happening or not. So I'm kind of one of these, I'm waiting to see. And I know the good is coming because it always is. We just have to sometimes wait for it. So, they later inquired, so let me move on. See if I can figure out how to do this again. So We Wisdom was founded in 1893 as Myrtle's baby. She heard in a meditation, you are to take care of the children. This is your work. And they made We Wisdom actually cost them money. They didn't make money on it. It was her commitment to really trying to help the children in a way that, seeing them as a unique grouping, part of Unity. Like I always say, children aren't the future of Unity. children are the present of unity that are learning in a different environment because of their age. So, and it went out of publication in 1991. My dream is somebody will make a lot of money sometime and come back to Unity and say, I want to start We Wisdom back up again. They still own the rights to the name, so to start it back up again and give them a grant and let them do it. So the only book Myrtle ever wrote, the books that you see that are under Myrtle's names were published. They're really just a collection of her stuff that were put together by somebody else. Uni did a lot of that.
It was after she died, like her healing letters
Yeah.
out after she died.
Yeah, these are things that were culled together by the editors at Unity World Headquarters. So was a story about children, the We Wisdom Way. And I thought it was interesting that she would use the story as a bedtime story for her kids, and they would tell her, but that's not how boys talk, and she would use their feedback to help edit it, so it would make it more effective when she published it. So, and in We Wisdom, one of the most popular prayers in Unity, I'm going to guess nowadays probably second to the prayer for protection, which is said in most churches, was the prayer of faith. Is everybody familiar with the prayer of faith?
Yeah, never heard it.
Page 4.
And if you go to the village, I think I said this yesterday, go to the village at 11 o'clock,
What happened to this?
at 11 o'clock on alternating days, you'll hear the bell tower, and everybody stops what they're doing and listens to Myrtle. If you're in class, the class stops for a minute, and Myrtle is reading the prayer of faith. And this is kind of like her, almost like a personal mantra for her.
But it was written by Hannah Moore Cohos.
Yep.
Reverend Ray, I'm not familiar with it, I don't think.
Are
you going to?
So, Robin, would you read it?
Yeah. God is my help in every need. God does my every hunger feed. God walks beside me, guides my way through every moment of the day. I now am wise, I now am true, patient, kind, and loving too. All things I am, can do, and be through Christ, the truth that is in me. God is my health, I can't be sick. God is my strength, unfailing, quick. God is my all, I know no fear, since God and love and truth are here.
It's a beautiful prayer.
Thank you.
It's a beautiful prayer. You know? So, and then finally, in the early publications, they had people write them and say, is there a way you could put something together that could cull this down and make it easy for us in one source to be able to read, study, and understand? Would you be so kind as to have one of your clearest writers, one who understands the principles and the uninformed mind of a student, write an explanation of the grand truth in a very simple form and simple and clear words? My guess is they were having the same struggle in 1800 that many of us have with Charles, is he tends to talk in a little bit of a lofty language, sometimes making up new words, you know, and flipping back and forth on I think Charles would get bored saying God, God, Spirit, Spirit. So he would just make up new words that say the same thing. So that's when they approached Emily Cady, who then said, no, I won't do that. I'm a doctor. I'm busy. And so they kept asking, and she kept saying no. And like all things, if you ask long enough, you wear people down, and they eventually say yes. And so her first lesson appeared in the magazine called The Statement of Being, which eventually he published 13 different pieces, which he then put together eventually they put it together as 3, 4 twice. There actually was 13, but they put 4, 4, and 4, and put those out, and then eventually put it together as a book, Lessons in Truth. Still one of the most studied books. The interesting thing is, Emily Cady did not always agree with Charles Fillmore and didn't always agree with Myrtle Fillmore. More aligned herself with Rickard's teachings, because Rickard, when he took over Unity School, one of the biggest differences is Emily Cady didn't believe in the 12 powers, also didn't believe in reincarnation, didn't believe in some of the stuff that Charles and Myrtle talked about. So, but that's okay, because Charles never said you had to believe everything. So.
Also, didn't they want her to come and talk, but she refused? She wouldn't come to, I don't know where I read that, but
I don't know.
She didn't want to.
I don't know that I ever read that. That doesn't make, that would, you know, it wasn't easy to travel from New York to Kansas City, especially if you have a thriving medical practice, because she was still a doctor at the time. So.
Somewhere I read that.
Okay, so let's go ahead. That gets us through the founding of Unity. Why don't we go ahead and take a quick break?
Okay. Who is that lady? I will never forget, because it happened again, I don't know when, and somebody at Unity said, hey, this teacher has the best grasp of how to say this simply, and you convinced me to buy this book in the bookstore.
Emily Cady.
It wasn't Emily Cady, it was somebody else. It was she worked at Unity, and she wrote a book on the 5 principles.
Oh, the 5 principles is she's the minister in San Diego.
Yeah.
That was one of the clearest books I ever read.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, for crying out loud.
I can't think, but I remember reading that book.
So you realize, of course, that the 5 principles are not Unity's 5 principles. Those are so Charles Fillmore's granddaughter got tired of people saying, what does Unity believe? So she just wrote it up one day. It's actually Connie Fillmore Ray's version of a simplified version, which we then immortalized as our 5 commandments.
That is cool.
Yeah.
So are you going to stop recording for break?
I can do that.
Yeah, because sometimes we have conversations we don't necessarily want the whole world to hear.
What would that be?
Okay.
We're starting recording again. Stop now. Go. All right. So now we're moving on to silent unity.
All right.
Creation of silent unity.
He says in a loud voice. Not the silent.
Silent unity. Everybody familiar with silent unity?
Yes.
Has everybody called silent unity?
Yes, with very mixed results.
Really?
Really?
Yeah.
Sometimes I get the most divine experience with someone, and other times it's like, I'm calling a call center.
Right. Because it's a call center.
Right.
And one of the things they struggle at Saturday, this is a present day fact, they struggle with getting people to work there because they're paid like a call center, which should be someplace in India where you don't have to pay too much. So you don't get a lot of money. And there's not that many Unity people who have the freedom to go and work for that wage, And most of the students, and now they're going to do away with the students on campus, so that'll do away with some.
Oh, wow.
So they just put out a national video saying, if you ever would like to work for Silent Unity, we have openings, apply and come. So they did talk about doing remotes, because you can do that with technology.
Yes.
But they never worked out the detail because they didn't want to, I think they didn't want to invest the money in the infrastructure that they would have needed to do. And they also wanted to have people do it for free. And, it's like you're asking a lot of volunteers, especially when you're investing a lot in infrastructure, to expect people to do it, instead of just expanding, so. Because if you did it for money and you could set up a call center in your church, you could hire prayer chaplains, You know, you're looking for work, in that interim between looking for work, why don't you work for Silent Unity for a few months, you know?
I do it in a heartbeat. Yeah.
Spend,
Volunteer 4 hours once a month to come in here and make coffee.
and that's what they were looking to do. But it was a pretty big investment on the technology and stuff, so they didn't do it. So Silent Unity began as the Society for Silent Help in 1890, and there is a prayer on 82. Some of this stuff I didn't know. This was the prayer they would pray. This was the only prayer they would pray. God is all goodness and everywhere present. He is the loving Father, and I am his child and have all the attributes of life, love, truth, and intelligence. In him is all health, strength, wisdom, and harmony. And as his child, all these become mine by recognition of the truth that God is all. That was the prayer they would say and then hold in the silence.
You
So-
know what words aren't in there?
What?
So they got to be covered some way.
What?
Abundance or prosperity.
Life, love, and truth and intelligence. So this is early on.
Uh-huh.
This is very early on when their whole focus was on healing.
Yeah.
So, but this was what the little band that would meet at their house at 10 o'clock at night would pray, and that would be the prayer that they would hold, and then they would go in silence. Like Silent Unity now is, they didn't need to know the actual condition because there's what?
Oh my God.
Right. And there are no
Needs in God.
There are no needs in God. That's Eric Butterworth. There are no needs in God. So you don't actually, which is why when I would call somebody or somebody would call me on the phone, I can tell you what we're going to pray about within less than 30 seconds. And so as soon as you take a breath, I'm moving into prayer when I worked for Silent Unity. I would be on the phone, generated the letter and the prayer, and back on the phone in under 2 minutes and 30 seconds. I did over 100, somewhere between 115 and 124 prayers in an 8-hour shift. So, because it's just, I don't get wrapped up in the condition. I only need enough to know what we're praying about and what the solution is, which is the exact opposite of whatever you want prayers about.
Right.
About how many people, did you say that? I don't know, are in there praying for people?
Now?
No, when you were there. Say
Right.
it like.
Well, this is 2011. So when I was there,
Yeah.
2011. So nowadays
Mhm,
is depending on the time of the day.
mhm.
They had cubicle spaces. Their cubicles were four, and then the corners were 2. So I think you could fit up to about 40 or maybe 45 prayer associates at any given
Wow.
time.
And you took 100 calls a day?
I worked an odd shift. I worked the evening shift from 8 at night till 4 in the morning.
Wow.
So overnight, we would only have 6. There would be one person in the prayer room. There would be one person on break. And then there would be 4 of us taking calls as long as somebody didn't need to take a break from a really hard prayer, go to the bathroom, get a drink of water. So there might only be 3 or 4 people on the phone. So,
Right.
yeah.
Gosh, that's a lot of prayers coming in, though.
Yeah.
You know?
So,
I still haven't figured out how you went to school all day, prayed all night, got all your homework done,
Yeah.
and still found time to eat, sleep, and go to the bathroom.
and I also was the youth ed director at Independence.
Wow.
Makes me tired just to think about it.
I wasn't there for the social life, though the last semester there I did socialize a little bit more. So, so that's the only prayer they would say, and they would all pray together at 10 o'clock at night and hold it in silence. Later, they shifted it to 9 because they realized, I thought it was 7, but the book says 9, because people wanted to start praying with them. And so what they did was they said, pray this prayer at this time, and we'll all be, because there's no space and time or distance in God,
Right.
you know, so we can all be together, even though we may be hundreds of miles apart. So,
And it was whoever's local time.
right. Right.
Then they realized distance didn't matter. Then they realized time didn't really
Right.
matter, right?
Right. But you also have to realize that that's why they shifted the time, is that, and I think in the beginning they were probably located mostly in the Midwest. So probably most people were Central Time. But, you also realize that even in being spiritual beings, we have a human experience, that we have a job. We have to get up in the morning, or we're farmers and stuff like that. So, so what they said was God's reach is not limited to space or time, and that prayers said remotely, because in the beginning, she thought she had to be there praying with you or directly connecting with you through a letter or something, and then realized they didn't have to do that at all. They could just pray. That was the new revelation. We could just pray. There is no space and time in God. So people around the country began joining them, and the magazine would publish what they called class thoughts, which were basically prayers. And so these were the only ones said. They started expanding their prayer list of what people could actually say in the prayers. So now the book that you get if you work for Silent Unity is, somebody put your fingers up and hold them so they can see. The book you get from Silent Unity is about this thick, and each topic that you have might have 30 prayers that have been written by prayer associates over the years, Unity ministers, students, teachers, just anybody can submit it. And if it's approved, then they put it in the next copy when they print it out. And, some people's prayer books would have prayers that they would find outside, and you could personalize your prayer book. So they allowed a little bit more room for spirit. But as a call center, there is also that you are monitored at times. And when you're monitored, your supervisor will go through. The supervisor doesn't actually take calls unless there's a really high volume and there's a lot of calls on hold because there's not enough prayer sources on. So my boss at night might take calls 4 or 5 times during the night if we had a high volume for some reason. Or there's a disaster that comes that they don't know about. If there's a Brussels attacks, the Paris attacks, a natural disaster, the people will be called in, but before they get there, the supervisors might be taking calls. But mostly they don't. They just monitor. And one of the things that we'll do is they have a checklist. And so your prayers have to have a certain format, which is you can't be asking. You got to be affirming. You don't get to ask, you affirm. So how did you do? So, and then you'll get called in the office and you'll be told, here's your things, here's what you did well, and here's your opportunities for growth, And if you have too many negatives, you might be given a warning notice like, hi, my name is Ray and I'll be praying with you today is totally unacceptable. If you ever call Silent Unity, hi. Thank you for calling Silent Unity. How may we pray with you? Because there is no I in God. You're not praying from your personality. The organization is praying, and it's actually God. So one of the things, and I didn't know this until I read the book, I thought it was interesting that they had the class notes were put on red paper. They called them the red leaf. And that people would cut them out and put them on their body as if the actual words on the paper had the power. And even though Charles Fillmore would write and would talk and would tell people, that the paper has no power, people did it anyhow. I found that extremely funny that we will try to give our power to something else instead of knowing that the power lies within, because it's hard to accept. You're not telling me I'm not changing God. So I'll give the power to this red piece of paper with words on it, and I'll slap it on my arm that's sore from arthritis, and that will cure me, And you might get cured, but it has nothing to do with the paper or the words on the paper. It's that you shifted your consciousness, even though you did it kind of a weird way by giving your power away.
Why couldn't it be a tool?
What?
Why couldn't it be a tool?
It can be a tool. Well, obviously it was, because that's what people wanted to turn it into. You know, Charles was trying to move us away. Really, his theology was moving us away from the idea that external things had the power, which is why, even though now there's an understanding and came out of Joseph Campbell that ritual and certain traditions are extremely important to connect people together and stuff, he wanted to move away from that because everything was so ritualized and everything was so formalized, and kind of like the Protestant Revolution of 400 years before, of that buying this shit of paper can somehow, or buying this little shit, this little coin, can somehow save you from years in hell, as if that has power, when in actuality it was just a money-making scheme to build Vatican City. But so he wanted to move away from that, and originally it was all letters. Silent Unity was all letters. But Silent Unity's official start date was 1890, so last year was officially 125 years of Silent Unity, of nonstop. So, and then they moved to, very quickly, as the telephone came into being, moved into answering phone calls, to the point of, and they would answer the phone calls themselves in the beginning, all night long. If people called, they would answer. Eventually, at their offices downtown Kansas City, they set up a phone, and someone would sit in there answering the phone all night long. And they talk about how you could come down the street and see the light on, and it would just warm you. I mean, there's still the mythology of it would warm your heart to know that somebody was in there waiting for somebody to call. And this is back in the day when not everybody had a phone. Now, I think the latest is that every person in the United States, man, woman, and child, has an average of 2 cell phones. That's how many cell phones are out there. So everything is connected differently. So, but they still had that, and that today has morphed into Twitter, internet. Everybody familiar with that knows that Unity has an app on their phone? You pray.
Oh, you pray.
You pray. You can type in a prayer, get a meditation, get an affirmation. But you can type in the prayer, and it will come back at you. They'll send you a response in the way that you sent your prayer in. If you make a telephone prayer, it comes up on a screen and it will populate. If you've ever called them on that phone, it will populate and tell you who you are, and they'll ask you, is there any information change, and would you like a letter? If you email them, it will say, would you like a letter? And have everybody gotten a letter back from Silent Unity? Okay. Very nice letter. If you prayed for I used to call for our cat who was sick while I was in school. I actually would call from my desk. I would call one of the other prayer associates and ask them for prayer for my cat, because I can pray, but I needed to hear the words, and then I would have them generate a letter and send it to Robin so that she knew that Nico was being prayed with. So it's very nice. But you can opt out of that if you don't want to spend the money. So
it's so nice to get a letter that's not a bill or a junk mail.
Right.
Yeah, right.
And he says it's about a little over, this is 1990, it's the 4th print. So we're talking, this is in the 80s. When I was at school, generated prayers through the number of ways that they can come in was over 2.5 million prayers a year. But I thought about it last night. That doesn't include the number of people who each individual church prays with each week. Because when we send it in, we send those names in, it's one prayer. It comes in as one prayer. Oh, the church has a bunch of prayers they printed. It's one prayer. So we have anywhere from 25 to 50 a week here. So you add to the about to 2.5 million, maybe 3 million prayers normal, plus all the prayers coming in from the churches.
I noticed this book said 1 million a year.
Right, and
So
it's way up from that.
Well,
Though Reverend Pat, who used to be on the board at Unity World Headquarters, says that the prayer volumes declined a little bit because younger people don't naturally go to the phone to make a prayer. And so to get the word out that they can tweet it, they can email it, they can text it, do the other ways to try and get more use out. Anybody watch like YouTubes and see Unity, Silent Unity comes up as an ad? I have. Or you go to do a Google search, and one of the ads that pops up is a Silent Unity ad. So they're starting to use more Google analytics and how to approach different people.
How do you do it with your prayer chaplains here? Do they take calls? How does that work?
The prayer chaplains here don't take calls, no.
Okay.
Actually, we suspended the prayer chaplain program, and we're refiguring it right now.
Okay.
Because we're just trying to recreate it in a new manner. So.
We use the Leilani.
Yeah, they use that here for years and stuff, but with the oneness blessers, it kind of seemed to split the energy of who wanted to be prayer chaplains and who wanted to do oneness blessings, and the energy needs to be reset at some point.
Yeah.
So. So the interesting thing was, even though Myrtle would reply to a lot of people, she didn't reply to everybody. She couldn't. She'd have been spending all day long writing letters, and and she personalized them. So her healing letters, I think she would just randomly pick out ones to do it. Prior to World War I, someone was up all night, just prior to World War I, was when they started having the 24-hour prayer vigil, which still continues today. So if you were to complete your SEE personal development at the village, one of the things you get to do on your graduation week, the week that you're going to graduate, which is always fun. So it's an interesting thing to do. I don't think most of you are going to go down and do that. But if you did that, one of the things you get to do as part of your graduation week is you get to go into and do a prayer vigil in the Silent Unity Prayer Tower. Otherwise, most people are not allowed into the prayer, aren't allowed up on that floor. So not anybody can just go in. You have to have a certain level. They want you to have a certain level of consciousness. International YOU, when they're there during IYOU week, they go up in teams and they get to set a prayer vigil. They do tell people who used to work for Silent Unity, former students, ministers, and things like that, if you come back, if you'd like to go up and do prayer vigils, you can do that. So, like if I went back and I wanted to do a prayer vigil, I can go up at any time. I'm allowed, because
it was neat to walk through and be in the area where they were making the calls and stuff. And they told us that if we wanted to, we could make an appointment and do that. We didn't. We were leaving, but they were very, very kind.
Make an appointment to take a call?
To sit in that special place.
Oh, to upstairs in the prayer vigil?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. I didn't know that. So that's nice.
Yeah, it was.
When were you down there?
2 years ago, summer.
When Brummet was doing his
okay, yeah.
originally. 3 years. I know.
So the interesting thing was where he showed in the book that tower no longer exists. They built a new tower for Silent Unity, a new prayer room, and they literally walked it over. There was a whole process of, in a lamp, walking the light over to the new Silent Unity tower.
Cool.
That is that.
Oh.
And you will see it, and the light is always shining. It's always kind of dim. There's nothing in there except a very large Bible if you want to open that and get a reference point, and a little thing that says, peace be still, I believe. So, it's very nice. So
if you were to go back and do the prayer vigil, would you be alone in the room, or would you be with someone who worked there so that they know that the prayers actually continue?
I'd probably be, somebody from Silent Unity is always up there, so I'd be in the room with somebody. So
That's really neat that you did that.
yeah.
That is
And I actually, as if you work for Silent Unity, you can actually volunteer and go back and do, like, if you do a spiritual retreat at Silent Unity, I could say I'm coming back, and with a brief refresher course on how to use the technology, I could actually pick up shifts for free. We had ministers who would come back and pick up shifts for free. So just, take some calls and stuff. So. One of the things I think is most interesting is a vast majority of the prayers to Silent Unity are not Unity people. So there's maybe 60, 70, maybe 90,000 people who are considered Unity people, and there's 3 million prayer calls a year. Vast majority of those calls are not coming from Unity students. We know we have prayer support in our churches. Most of our church, the ministers are all trained. It comes from outside. Quick story, and then we'll move on. Was I had a woman call, and and she worked for a priest. She was the housekeeper for a priest in, must be a large diocese, because most of the priests don't get housekeepers anymore. And she said, I'm calling because my father so-and-so is not well, and I would like healing prayers. And so we prayed, a healing prayer, and I said, would you like a letter? She says, oh, no. Can't get a letter. Can't let the father know I called you. I said, okay, may I ask you a question? She said, sure. She says, why did you call us then? She goes, well, because your prayers work.
Oh,
wow.
So,
Wow.
So in some consciousness level, she believes that the affirmative style of prayer works. So
a lot of people are familiar with the little booklet, The Daily Word.
Mhm.
Years ago, I had no concept of really what Unity was, but read the Daily Word.
yeah, it was interesting. I worked before I went off when I first started getting into Unity back in the middle 90s. And my boss's mother, Brad and Brian's mother, was a evangelical Baptist of some sort, I think, and very conservative. And she says, "Oh, you can't go to that's a cult." And I said, "But she read Daily Word every day." I said, "You know that's our publication." Well, that can't be, because this is really good stuff. But that culture and can't, And again, we have, a majority of the people getting Daily Word are not Unity people.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I didn't make a slide up for the first years in ministries. I don't know why I didn't. I just didn't. So the Fillmores weren't, I'm not going to give you another break because it's only 15 minutes left, so I'll let you go a few minutes early. So you give a little extra time for lunch. So the Fillmores, though, obviously from the very get-go, this was not a money-making scheme. This was not a way for them to make their riches. The money, the Fillmores from the very get-go, Charles especially did not believe in copyrights, did not believe in any of he didn't believe in charging. He believed to let God handle everything, and that if you treated people fairly, they would treat you. So that's why most of Unity is based on a free will love offering. That's why our classes are based on a free will love offering when it's somebody here. So my experience has always been, that's Edwin Gaines. Everybody familiar with Edwin?
Mhm.
Okay, that's Edwin. Don't charge because you're limiting God. Don't even suggest, because if you suggest $10, then that's what somebody's going to give you. She says, trust that people will give as they can, and it'll all work out in the end, and don't worry about it. Don't completely go put your faith, which is very hard to do. It's very, very hard to do, especially if you make your living off of doing workshops and retreats and selling stuff. So then that was the Fillmores in the beginning. So they were teachers, but they also opened themselves up to other people coming in and teachers. I love the fact that they had Emma Curtis Hopkins in quite frequently, and they would go up there. And the interesting is that Charles didn't hesitate to disagree with somebody that he let in to be a teacher. Kind of like Robin sitting in the front row when I'm preaching and her telling me I did something wrong. So
Straighten your tie.
she's the one who, she'll put me up on the pedestal when I'm feeling bad, and she'll knock the pedestal over if I'm getting too high.
I thought that was part of my job
That's what we're, yes, exactly.
The other thing is, Charles was very clear that he wasn't about making anybody else wrong, but he would only participate in things that he thought were in alignment with what he taught. So he was joining the International New Thought Alliance and quitting and rejoining and quitting and rejoining.
Yeah.
And that continues on to this day. Unity has probably in the 20 odd years I've been in Unity, joined and quit the International New Thought Alliance at least once or twice. They get in and they get out, So because they tend to be a little bit more eclectic and allow in things that are other than just straight mind science. So, which is when you get in the alliance, you're going to allow in a lot of different things. So, and he always said, which I find interesting, that it was always about starting an educational institution and that you would come and study and then go back to your churches.
Yes, you didn't quit your church to go to Unity.
His thing all along was, we're just here to teach. So his church services were more of seminars where, there'd be singing and then there'd be some of the reading of some stuff. But the actual message part was more like a seminar where it was a conversation. It's actually more like a YOU conversation rather than like a traditional church service, except that because he was located in the Midwest, many of the people who came were coming from the southern states, which are dominated by who? Southern Baptists and the Baptists, so different Baptists. And they would come and learn this new way of thinking and take it back to their church, and then were told they couldn't teach that and they'd be thrown out of their church. They were quite free. So then they started saying, but Charles, we need something. And that's when study groups started, the original study groups. That's what this started as, was a study group, someplace for us to continue to study that which we learned in Kansas City, but but our churches weren't giving us any avenue to do that. They weren't going to give you classroom space to have a Bible meeting to study the metaphysics of the Old Testament. The Old Testament was already told you what it meant. It's right there in black and white. So most of the churches started as study until they started organizing. And the one thing, so Unity at times is very, very forward-looking, and sometimes we lag a little bit. So if you look at the pictures in the school, very first class, all women. 1918, all women being ordained. Most churches didn't even allow women to speak at that time, let alone be ordained. It was a big deal when the UCC in the 70s ordained a woman. It split the Episcopal Church when women were being ordained. It split the Lutheran Church. You know, Missouri Synod,
No women.
no women.
It can be a deaconess, but that's as high as you can go.
Right. So the ELCA is, I think, actually even headed by a woman now. Yeah. So 1918. Integration, not so much. They moved a little slower. We weren't ahead of the curve on that one. It used to be that blacks could not stay overnight on at Unity Village. They couldn't stay on the grounds. They could come in and take a class, but they couldn't stay on the grounds. They weren't allowed in the swimming pool at the same time because that was the social milieu that Charles grew up in, and it didn't even dawn on him until, and there's lots of myths about how that all changed, but it's one of the reasons why Johnny Coleman went to Chicago and started her New Thought Church, and why Martha Mosley went to Detroit and started the urban school, was to be more inclusive. So they moved a little slow in civil rights. We were behind the curve on that, not ahead. We actually were a little slow on gay rights, which was surprising since we always were inclusive, but they didn't allow a gay marriage until after like 2000 on grounds, which was interesting considering about half the ministerial classes are gay, or lesbian. But they moved a little slow. They're not always at the forefront of everything, but some things they are and some things they're not. And yeah, they always were willing to move without so much of the resistance once things are pointed out. So
That's very different than a lot of other spiritual traditions.
Right.
Yeah, where you're condemned for life.
And the interesting thing is they never put a price on the prayers, and they still don't to this day.
What do you mean?
They don't put a price on it. A lot of they don't charge you.
Yeah.
You just call and everything's done for free. They like to send you the letters because there's always the envelope to send back a love offering. So, and from a human standpoint, it is the major funding source for Unity World Headquarters outside of dedicated money that's given from like trusts and people have died and left bequests and things like that.
More than Daily Word.
What?
More than Daily Word?
More than Daily Word.
Wow.
It is a major funding source.
Wow. The contributions to Silent Unity.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Well, we tithe as an organization monthly to Silent Unity because I stay in principle. Where are we being spiritually fed as a community? Silent Unity holds our prayers every week. Hundreds a month in prayer every week. They are spiritually feeding us and supporting us. So, all right.
So tomorrow, chapters 8 through 10?
Yeah, we'll do that.
Well, it don't matter to me. You're the boss.
No, that's good. All right. Any questions before we go? This is a little dry. I'm doing a lot of the talking, but it's not a real big thing for.
It's not dry at all. Why would you
No,
say
it's
that?
so
Well, it's not a place for a lot of conversation. It's
Well,
not
you
really-
have more, side information
Okay.
than what we
Your
have
personal
here.
experiences in it make it
Yeah.
more interesting. I love
Okay.
stories.
All right. All right. Thank you, guys. Boys.
See you after lunch.
Bye, boys. See you tonight.
Okay, now this. That's it.
Stop recording.